It's safe to say that Rare's Goldeneye 007 is one of the most important games of all time. Releasing when console first-person shooters were treated as second to PC shooters, Goldeneye showcased that home consoles could very much match the fun and excitement of their computer counterparts. Even though gamers had to wait a ridiculous amount of time, it's now possible to experience this game on modern platforms, so hooray for that. But the tale of Goldeneye isn't just what you play, there are a lot of myths, cut content and interesting quirks that litter this classic game. As a huge fan of both the film franchise and the game, I figured it would be fun to dive in and just explore some of those quirks. Of course, I'm not going to cover every quirk here, so if you know anything interesting about this game, let me know in the comments.
Goldeneye was almost anything but an FPS.
Before Goldeneye was a console-defining FPS, it almost existed as both a Super Nintendo side-scrolling game and then an on-rail shooter similar to Time Crisis. Nintendo even showcased footage of this during some of the early N64 hype videos. To show how far this went, the first line of the game's 9-page design document reads, "The game will be similar to Virtua Cop in terms of gameplay." The game's director, Martin Hollis, explained that the development team took a lot of inspiration from other games released around the development time, including Nintendo's Super Mario 64 and id Software's Doom, a game that Dr. Dope credited with changing the course of GoldenEye's development. You can see the linear design in some of the game's final levels, where it's clear that the player was going to be more restricted in their movements. Honestly, I think they made the best decision here.
Goldeneye the game released almost 2 years after Goldeneye the movie.
Movie tie-in video games are generally created as a way to cash in on the hype and popularity of an upcoming movie. Goldeneye the game may be as memorable as its movie counterpart, but it didn't release anywhere near the Goldeneye movie. Goldeneye the movie released in November 1995, while the game launched in August 1997, 21 months after the fact. Goldeneye ended up releasing mere months before the next James Bond movie, which was released in December 1997, but Goldeneye wasn't the only James Bond game to arrive late. EA released their first James Bond game in November 1999. This was a full 23 months after Tomorrow Never Dies had already landed in cinemas, and The World Is Not Enough landed a full year after that movie's release.
Goldeneye was set to feature a rideable motorbike.
One of the most iconic parts of Goldeneye was the fact that you can jump in a tank and use it on several levels. This is one of the first times a first-person shooter allowed this, something commonplace in modern games. What you might not know is that originally there was going to be a motorbike in the mix. In the Goldeneye movie, Bond escapes the runway by riding a motorbike. In the game you don't do this, but you can ride a tank through the level instead. According to Alice Knorr in her Goldeneye 007 book, it was deemed unworkable to have a motorbike in the game, even though the developers really wanted to make it happen. The model for the bike did make it into the game, appearing on the desk in the Surface 1 level, which of course you can blow up. The idea of zipping around Goldeneye's levels riding a motorbike is a fun one to me, however I can understand why at the time, development crunch meant that this was just not a feature that could make it into the final game.
The iconic multiplayer was almost not in the game.
Ask anyone who was playing video games in the late 1990s about multiplayer modes and Goldeneye will inevitably come up in that conversation. In fact, if you bring up Goldeneye at all, a lot of people will tell you that they only ever played with their friends in front of the TV. This game set the standard for multiplayer gaming on consoles at the time, and for many years after, developers tried desperately to capture this magic again. But it might shock you to learn that this was a very late addition to the game. The mode was conceived by the game's director, Martin Hollis, and reportedly thrown together in secret in around 6 weeks, right before the game went gold. Speculation suggests that Eon, the then overseers of the James Bond license, were very iffy about the idea of good guys shooting each other in a multiplayer mode. This is why in future games where multiplayer is present, it's usually designed to stop good guys shooting each other, a bit odd if you ask me. A lot of the levels from this mode are cut down versions of levels made for the single player game. Interestingly, the whole of the caverns level is present whenever you play a multiplayer game in that map, but you can only access about half of it as there are doors that lock you out. It's crazy to think that multiplayer very nearly didn't make it into this iconic game.
There are 2 crates that break the game's logic.
This one's more of a fun novelty than anything else, but throughout Goldeneye 007 you'll notice that everything explodes. Shoot a crate, explode. Shoot a chair, explode. Shoot a toy model, explosion. There is one item throughout the game that consistently does not explode when shot at, and that's these metal crates. These feature prominently throughout the game and are used to block the player at points, except for 2 of these crates. On the dam level, if you wander down to the pier and locate these 2 metal boxes, you can blow them up. These are the only 2 metal crates in the entire game that do this. Why do they do this? Who knows, but it's a really interesting oddity.
Nintendo was keen on a sequel.
When Goldeneye was released, it received huge critical acclaim and sold over 8 million copies, making it the third best-selling Nintendo 64 game. Those numbers were staggering and helped to shift N64 consoles by the truckload. Of course, Nintendo noticed this and were very keen to make a sequel happen. According to Goldeneye director Martin Hollis, the team at Rare had no interest in making another James Bond game and were content to move on to another project. Nintendo, by all accounts, accepted this and never brought the topic up again. Part of the reason for this is the tight control Eon had over the James Bond license. A lot of the $400 million generated by the game went to the movie studio and not to the developer or Nintendo. The Bond license ultimately went to EA, who would publish multiple Bond games in the late 90s and early 2000s. Rare would go on to develop another first-person shooter, but it would be their own IP, Perfect Dark, which would land late in the Nintendo 64's life cycle. It didn't sell quite as well as Goldeneye, however critics and fans generally regard this game much higher than Goldeneye. It sold 2.5 million copies, which isn't too bad.
Rare toyed with the idea of making you reload with the Rumble Pack.
The Nintendo 64 Rumble Pack was designed as a way to make gameplay more immersive for the player. To add this to your Nintendo 64 experience, you had to purchase a peripheral that slotted into the back of your N64 controller. Rare saw this peripheral and toyed with the idea of using the mechanic as a way to make the player reload their guns in Goldeneye 007. As Steve Ellis, one of the game's developers, stated in 2011,
"At one point, we were going to have reloading done by the player unplugging and reinserting the Rumble Pack on the controller. Nintendo weren't keen on that idea, and I think it might have affected the pacing a bit."
While the idea was novel in concept, it would have completely slowed down gameplay and turned the game into something of a chore to play. Can you imagine 4-player deathmatch with everyone having to pull out their rumble packs and put them back in to reload?
Goldeneye was one of the first console FPS games to have dual stick controls.
Some people love the N64 controllers and others despise it, but I think many people would say that it isn't super ideal for first-person gaming, in particular if you're returning to play after generations of modern controls. But did you know that this game actually lets you use dual analog controls? Somewhat. If you're willing to use two Nintendo 64 controllers and enjoy the hardships that come with this, you can turn on control schemes in the game's options, and these allow you to play with two control sticks. While I appreciate that this is here in the first place, I have to ask the question, who on earth would actually play a game like this? It's such a quirky part of Goldeneye, but at the same time it's just so silly.
The game has a hidden emulator with a bunch of ZedX Spectrum games.
Goldeneye sold over 8 million copies on Nintendo 64, but I'm willing to wager that almost none of those people realised they bought themselves a ZedX Spectrum emulator at the same time. During the game's development, a ZedX Spectrum emulator was inserted into the game's code to test to see if the N64 could actually emulate the console. It was never removed from the retail build of the game, just made inaccessible to gamers. It also comes with a selection of games including Saberwolf and Jetpack. If you're curious to try this out yourself, you can modify a ROM of the game, and you too can experience the joys of ZedX Spectrum goodness on your Nintendo 64 emulator of choice.
There's a ton of cut content.
It should come as no surprise that a game as big as Goldeneye 007 has a lot of cut content, but what might surprise you is how much of that content has been left in the open for gamers to see. Obviously I'm not going to be able to cover everything that was cut here in this section, so I'll speed through some of the more notable ones. There's the infamous island on the dam level, which would have seen Bond ride a boat across the dam to reach a new part of the level. You can actually see this with the sniper rifle if you grab it early in the level. Silo features an entire air duct that is still in the game but not accessible without no clipping. This was likely going to form part of the on rails level. Silo also has a unique item that Oromov carries, a briefcase. This serves no purpose in the final game. Finally, Rare pushed hard for the game to feature classic Bonds, but unfortunately licensing issues and Eon put an end to that dream before it could be released into the final game. And that's really it for this video. Goldeneye 007 will always be one of my favourite games of all time. It's a game with endless charm, and I just have so many memories attached to this game. And I'm really happy that the game has been brought forward to the HD consoles, even if I feel the version we got was somewhat underwhelming. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on Goldeneye, and do you know any quirks of your own?